Hello everyone and welcome back. Before I can really get into it, this video needs some context first, so let me quickly explain. On Tumblr, a while back, I started posting a comic about Hollow Knight. It was based off a line from a fanfic I read, which inspired a whole slew of ideas. Specifically the line, digging her half of the graves, in reference to that fanfic's Radiance. If you want to check out the fanfic itself, I'll link it in the description. It's called Broken Open, Revealing Hollowness and Vibrance by Jax Capta on AO3. Well, that little comic I posted, it got a bit of attention. I'm still a little shocked because the comic itself wasn't that high quality and it was completely out of context of the story I imagined for it. So I decided to build the context around that scene and it kind of spiraled until, well, now it's finished. I had a lot of thoughts about this comic while I was finishing it. Usually I'd have shared them under the comic itself, but I really didn't want to bog down the posts on those last ones. So this video is going to be a retrospective / thought dump for this kind of niche comic I have. But hey, what else is the internet for? When I first started this comic, it was very sketchy and minimum effort. I just wanted to get the idea out of my head and onto paper. Well, digital paper. So the poses were very rough and the coloring was very simple. I was taking a lot of inspiration from some random dude LMAO on Tumblr and their cast Apocalypse at You. It's an absolutely fantastic comic. They have a very sketchy, movement-filled style, which works really well for the way they tell their stories. Personally, I don't think it works as well as for my comic because mine is more dialogue heavy and focuses more on body language than it does action. If I had to work on it some more, I'd probably redraw some of the sketchy comics into something a bit cleaner and clearer. Especially the text. It's hard to read because it's just my own handwriting. Placeholder text. Beyond that though, I'm really happy with the paneling in my comic. I was trying really hard not to fall into just doing rectangles for each panels because personally it just doesn't look as interesting. Not that you should never do them, it's just a personal preference. I prefer to warp the panels themselves to fit the emotion, framing, or even just the story beats. Sometimes I would draw the panels first and then whatever was inside, or I would fit the panels around the pose I drew first. I also found that posting earlier in the morning led to more people seeing my comic. I live in the West, so maybe it has to do with time zones. The East Coast people got to see it at 8 if I posted at 6 or whatever. It could be that it was online more during the day instead of just posted late at night. Or maybe people on Tumblr just check their stuff in the morning. Honestly, I have no clue. Pacing for me was a bit off. This is one of my biggest criticisms of my own work here. I didn't completely plan out the story from the beginning, only going from comic to comic with interesting ideas I wanted to explore. Towards the middle and end of the comic, I did do a better job of this. I either combined ideas, so the most important were shown while also having elements that I really liked from the others, or I cut out comic ideas entirely when I couldn't use them. The biggest part of my comic that suffered because of this was Grim and Hollow's interactions. I showed the beginning and the end, but I skipped over all the development that made the dynamic interesting to me in the first place. If I could go back, I would have definitely done a comic set with development in their relationship. However, to be fair to myself, I think Radiance's change and development was well-paced, even in the early comics where I wasn't planning stuff out as much. She learns different lessons over time, slowly. In some comics, I was explicit about this, but in others, I try to keep it subtle. I won't give any examples here because it's the reader's choice to be able to look back and find those lessons. Her interactions with the Pale King were well spaced, I think, and it ended where it needed to for them. I mostly complained that I didn't get to explore more character interactions and ideas that I wanted to. But as I said, I had time restraints. This is the end of the main Mortal Radiance comic, and I want to kind of explain why. I could have tried to continue, explore all there was to explore, but real life kicked me in the butt, and I needed to not get lost in the minutiae of it all. I was going back to school and also working, so I had a deadline, and I needed to finish the comic before I went back to school. As for why it needed an end at all, well, this is more personal, but I've never finished any comic project before. Any stories that I've tried to work on, I've kind of lost motivation halfway through and just kind of left them open-ended. I really need to finish it because I need to prove to myself that it was something I was capable of. And I did. This on its own is enough to make me proud. On top of that, there was also a dub going on. I've never had somebody dub my stuff before, so this is a first for me, and I didn't want to leave them on a cliffhanger or just on a nebulous end like I've seen so many other comic dubs do. I love watching comic dubs of just like any fandom I'm in. It's very fun for me. I always kind of imagined what it would be like if somebody did dub my comic, and so it's been something I've wanted. Just never thought I'd have. I'm really glad I was able to have it, though. Thank you, Lenstubs, for that. Your videos inspired me to keep going, even when I was kind of like struggling for motivation at the end, as I was sprinting for the finish line. And I watched the videos a lot as I was doing those comics and like thinking on them and the story I had in mind. I don't think I'll be doing any more for the story after this, unfortunately. At least, not serious comics in my free time. I might post silly things now and then. After all, I'm still proud of the project, but unless I'm commissioned, the main comic is done. Thank you all for your time and love. It's been a ride, and the comments, notes, tags, they all kept me going. And I don't think I'd be finished without them. Seriously, you guys rock. Thank you all so much. And I hope you all can have a good day. You're still here? The video's over. What else would there be to talk about? Oh, I see. There was some unused comic ideas I kind of briefly mentioned. I mean, I guess I could talk about those. But you gotta promise to remember that these aren't finished ideas and I'm not promising to make them. Got it? Good. The one I'll start with is one I really should have done. It takes place before the Pale King is introduced, but after Radiance is taken to the seer. It is actually really important because it dealt with Rady actually getting the job to become a gravedigger, and the whole premise of the comic. It would also have explained that Seer agreed to supervise Rady while Hornet figured out what to do with her. That's Ghost didn't really want Rady dead. I really should have done this one, and I have no idea why it wasn't done. I even have some of the dialogue I plan to use in the sketches with Seer. Seriously, I just completely skipped over it. Why? The second has to do with Grimm. It was between him and Hornet. Specifically, it was Hornet warning and / or threatening him, and him mostly being amused by it. I even have sketches of him pointing her nail away from him. This one was cut mostly due to time restraints. It was getting close to the deadline, and I still had arguably more important comics to draw, and this seemed more like setup than resolution. It's unfortunate, but I had to cut corners. Thirdly, we have one originally meant to be part of the Mourner series of comics. Instead of Hornet asking for help at the end, it was originally going to be Ghost asking for 2 graves, one for Cloth and one for Quirrell. Since I changed it, this technically isn't canon anymore, so it's up to reader interpretation to speculate what happened to them. This one was cut for time restraints too. Quadruply, we have a sibling bonding time! Basically, it would be a series of comics that would be set before the Mourners. It would eventually lead to Hornet's decision to ask Rady for a gravestone. Hornet would be putting too much stress on herself, trying to look after both Hollow and Ghost and the bleeding grave of her sire's kingdom. Ghost and Hollow decide to force her to relax and talk about what's on her mind. At that point, she would break down and tell them. This was cut because it was too big, and would take too much time, however important it may have been. But also because I would just be retreading ground from the fanfic this was inspired by. If you want to read that kind of story, I suggest you read the fic. It does a much better job at telling it than I ever could. Finally, we have a cute one that I cut because it was mostly fun fluff and, yeah, time. In the comic, Grimm finds Ghost very cute and tries to show them off to Rady, who is still terrified of Ghost at this point. And of course, being a brother, Grimm uses this to tease and torment her, just a bit. It mostly played for comical laughs, nothing serious. And that's all, for real this time. I hope you all have a good day, and, thank you. Really. It means a lot.